A Cold Morning in the Forbidden City, February 1912. A 5-year-old boy is sitting on a throne in a hall built for the sons of heaven.
And adults in the room are reading out a document he cannot understand.
It is a decree of abdication, issued in his name by a woman acting as regent, ending 2,000 years of imperial rule in China.
And nobody tells the child anything.
He goes on living in the palace. The eunuchs go on kneeling to him, and for another 12 years he is addressed as the emperor of a country that no longer has one.
I seen Puyi, 10th and last emperor of the Qing dynasty.
And he would spend the next 55 years being picked up and put down by other people's revolutions.
Puppet, prisoner, war criminal, gardener.
And this is the story of a throne that was already completely hollow when they put a toddler on it.
Which is where we have to start, because the dynasty he inherited had been dying for 70 years before he was born.
The Qing were Manchus, a people from the northeast who had conquered China in 1644.
And ruled a vast, genuinely prosperous empire through the 18th century. In 1750, it was arguably the richest state on Earth.
And then came the 19th century, and a sequence of blows no state could easily have absorbed.
Britain, running an enormous trade deficit with China, financed it by selling Indian opium into a country where opium was illegal.
And when China tried to stop it, Britain went to war, twice, to keep the drug trade open, and won both times.
And the treaties that followed forced open ports, ceded Hong Kong, imposed indemnities, and granted foreigners immunity from Chinese law.
Which is called extraterritoriality, and it means a foreigner who commits a crime in China is not subject to Chinese courts.
A sovereign state that cannot prosecute crimes committed on its own soil is not entirely a sovereign state, and everybody involved knew it.
Then the Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864.
Led by a man who believed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ and had killed somewhere in the range of 20 million people.
20 million. It is one of the deadliest conflicts in all of human history, and most people outside China have never heard of it.
Then defeat by Japan in 1895, which was profoundly humiliating in a specific way.
Because Japan had begun modernizing later than China, and had simply done it better.
Then the Boxer Uprising of 1000, when an 8-nation foreign army occupied Beijing and imposed an indemnity so vast it took decades to pay.
And presiding over the last half-century of all this was the Empress Dowager Cixi,
who had entered the palace as a concubine and ruled from behind 2 child emperors for 47 years.
In 1898, the young Guangxu emperor attempted a program of radical reform.
And Cixi shut it down after 100 days and confined him in a lakeside pavilion for the rest of his life.
10 years in a pavilion on an island, in his own palace, while she ruled in his name.
On the 14th of November, 1908, Guangxu died, and Cixi died the following day.
And modern forensic testing of Guangxu's remains found arsenic at levels consistent with acute poisoning.
So the timing was almost certainly not a coincidence. She outlived him by about 20 hours, and it looks very much as though she arranged it.
And she had chosen the successor from her deathbed, her great-nephew Puyi.
Aged 2 years and 10 months.
He was taken from his family home at night, screaming, and carried into the Forbidden City.
There's an account of his wet nurse being the only person who could calm him and being brought along. And she is more or less the only warmth in his entire childhood.
At the enthronement in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, he cried and struggled through hours of ceremony.
While his father knelt beside the throne trying to quiet him, whispering that it would soon be over. It'll be finished soon. Don't cry.
And onlookers remembered that afterwards as an omen, which is the sort of thing people remember afterwards.
3 years later, the dynasty fell. Almost by accident.
An accidental bomb explosion in Wushang in October 1911 exposed a revolutionary cell inside the army.
And the units involved, facing execution anyway, mutinied because there was nothing left to lose.
And province after province declared independence from the Qing in a matter of weeks.
The court's last resort was Yuan Shikai, the most capable general in China, whom it had earlier dismissed and now begged to come back.
And Yuan came back, took command, and then negotiated with both sides simultaneously.
And arranged a deal that suited Yuan Shikai. The emperor abdicates, the republic is established, and Yuan is its president.
The abdication in February 1912 came with something called the Articles of Favorable Treatment,
which is an extraordinary arrangement, and it's the thing that shapes his whole life.
He keeps his title, keeps the northern half of the Forbidden City, keeps his eunuchs and his servants,
and receives a very large annual subsidy from the Republic that has just abolished him.
So he grows up inside a walled miniature court, thousands of attendants performing rituals for a state that no longer exists.
While outside the walls, a few hundred meters away, China fractures into warlord territories and starves.
His education came partly from Confucian tutors, and partly, after 1919, from a Scottish scholar named Reginald Johnston,
who taught him English, gave him the name Henry, and introduced him to bicycles, telephones, and Western clothes,
and diagnosed his severe short-sightedness,
which the court had resisted correcting,
because spectacles were undignified for an emperor.
The boy had been half-blind for years over a question of protocol.
And he rode a bicycle through halls where mandarins had once kowtowed.
And had the ancient door sills cut down so the wheels could pass, which is, when you think about it, the whole century in one image.
He also discovered that his own household was systematically looting him.
The palace stores held centuries of accumulated treasure, and the eunuchs were quietly selling it off.
So he ordered an inventory in 1923.
And a fire conveniently destroyed the warehouse holding the most valuable items before anyone could count them.
He expelled most of the eunuchs after that, well over 1,000 people, out of the gates in a day.
And in 1924, a warlord named Feng Yusheng took Beijing, tore up the Articles of Favorable Treatment, and gave the household 3 hours to leave.
Puyi, aged 18, walked out of the Forbidden City for good.
And took refuge in the Japanese legation, then moved to the Japanese concession in Tianjin.
And that flight into Japanese protection defines the rest of his life. Everything after this follows from it.
He spent 7 years in Tianjin, living as a wealthy playboy, Western suits, dance halls, golf, imported cars, and English name,
while cultivating absolutely anyone who might restore him, warlords, foreign diplomats, adventurers.
And he was bitter and increasingly obsessed with the throne.
And then, in 1928, comes the grievance that consumed him completely.
And in 1928, a warlord's troops dynamited the Qing imperial tombs, blew the doors, and looted the bodies of his ancestors,
including Cixi and the great Qianlong emperor, corpses pulled out and stripped for jewelry.
And the Republican government did essentially nothing about it, a gesture, an investigation, and no consequence.
And Puyi swore revenge and concluded that no Chinese government would ever protect his family's dignity.
And Japan was listening, very attentively.
In September 1931, the Japanese Kwantung Army staged an explosion on a railway near Mukden, blamed Chinese soldiers, and used it as the pretext to seize all of Manchuria.
Which was, not incidentally, the Manchu homeland, his family's homeland.
And they needed a face for the occupation, something that could be presented to the world as self-determination.
In 1932, Puyi was smuggled out of Tianjin and installed as chief executive of the new state of Manchukuo.
And crowned its emperor in 1934.
And there's a detail from that coronation that tells you everything.
He had wanted to be restored in the robes of the Qing, the dragon robes, the real thing.
And the Japanese made him wear a modern military uniform for the main ceremony. He was permitted the dragon robe only for a private rite beforehand, where nobody would see it.
And he understood exactly what that meant. He wrote about it later. He knew precisely who was in charge.
Manchukuo was recognized by almost nobody. The League of Nations investigated and rejected it.
And Japan walked out of the League rather than accept the finding.
And Puyi signed whatever he was given. His ministers were Japanese, his guards were Japanese, his household was penetrated.
He later said he required permission to leave the palace grounds. The Emperor of Manchukuo had to ask.
And meanwhile, Manchukuo functioned as an industrial and military base for the invasion of the rest of China.
And as the site of Unit 731, where human beings were used for biological warfare experiments.
Which is the fact that sits underneath any sympathy you might feel for him. He signed the decrees of that state.
In August 1945, after the Soviet Union declared war and swept into Manchuria, he abdicated for the third time.
Third. He'd now lost 3 thrones and he was 39.
He tried to fly to Japan and was captured by Soviet troops at an airfield in Shenyang.
5 years in Soviet custody, and he testified at the Tokyo war crimes trials in 1946.
Where he presented himself as a helpless prisoner of the Japanese throughout.
An account that was partly true, and which he later admitted was substantially self-serving.
In 1950, the Soviets handed him to the new People's Republic of China.
And he fully expected to be executed. He said afterwards that he assumed he would be shot on arrival.
Instead, he was sent to Fushan War Criminals Management Center for 9 years of what the state called re-education.
Labor, study sessions, and the writing of repeated confessions, rewritten when they were judged insufficient.
And he was, by every account, initially useless at ordinary life. He had never dressed himself, never tied his own shoes, never made a bed or washed a cup. Other prisoners had to teach him, men who had been his subjects, teaching a 45-year-old man to fold a blanket.
He was pardoned in 1959 by special amnesty.
And he returned to Beijing and worked as a gardener at the Botanical Gardens, later as an editor in a literary archive.
And he bought a ticket, like everybody else, to visit the Forbidden City as a tourist.
There's a story that he corrected a guide who had a detail wrong about one of the rooms.
He married a hospital nurse, his 5th wife. By most accounts, it was the first ordinary relationship of his life.
He wrote an autobiography, heavily shaped by his handlers, and became a modest propaganda asset.
Living proof that the state could remake anyone, which was the point of keeping him alive, and he knew that too.
And during the Cultural Revolution, the Red Guards, unsurprisingly, took an interest in the last emperor.
He was given a degree of official protection, but he was harassed, and he lost access to medical care at points.
He died of kidney cancer and heart disease in October 1967, aged 61.
So, the verdict. And it's not really a verdict on him at all.
Puyi never really held power for a single day of his life. Not one.
He was placed on thrones at 2 years old and at 28, and each time by people who needed a symbol rather than a ruler.
The Qing court needed an infant they could rule through. The Japanese needed a face they could photograph.
And the People's Republic needed a redeemed war criminal in a garden.
Every single one of them got exactly what they wanted from him.
And that is his lesson, and it's a cold one. A crown is not authority.
It is a costume, and there's always somebody standing off stage who decides when you put it on and when you take it off. He wore it for 55 years and never once chose to.
This was History But Better, podcast, episode 19.